Great. Okay. So, we are happy to have this presentation about immigration landscape for the International Research Fellows, and Brendan will be talking about that. Before that, I just wanted to let people know what INet-NYC is. So let me see if I can proceed. Yeah. So INet-NYC is the International Networking NYC. It is a community for all the international researcher, especially in New York City. We are here to support and offer professional development and help the community to build a network. This is from all the STEM international scientists in the NYC area. And we support our main forum with the career development events, different kind of networking and social events, and different research opportunities outside USA, all over the world, and also different info sessions like this one, like the immigration sessions or tax sessions. This INet-NYC is composed with different board members from major universities in New York City, especially from New York University, Sloan Kettering, Columbia University, Yale University, etc. We also have almost more than 900 members. And this is the image you see. This is a recent Central Park meet and greet event. And these are the most amazing people I am working with. And I will encourage all the people who are interested to join us, and also passionate about the professional guidance and networking for all the international scientists in the USA. We are looking for the enthusiastic people from all around the country in USA, and who are passionate about our INet-NYC's main mission and want to join our team. You can be a institutional representative for INet from your own institute, be it outside of the New York City, and also you can be board members. Please watch out for our vacancy list in our INet-NYC community. And we are very active on our social media platform. So for our online platform, please watch out for the INet-NYC LinkedIn platform. And also we are doing a live streaming right now on the Facebook platform. Please check out that. And we are also in Twitter and Instagram. Also, we have a channel in YouTube where we generally record and post all the recorded sessions, not only like these info sessions, but also different career development sessions and things like that. I definitely encourage people to tune into those social media platforms and get the notifications whenever we have some interesting and informative sessions like this. About the upcoming events from INet-NYC. So just after the postdoc appreciation week on Saturday, September 25th, we are planning a in-person session in Central Park. We are going to meet in front of the famous Bethesda fountain, and there will be a Central Park quest. And this will be a fun activity, and winners will be rewarded. All the people in New York City area, all the researchers in New York City area are encouraged to join here. Please follow and register for the event on Eventbrite. The link is here. And the next session will be a long 4-part series for the professional development seminar. This is about how to have a transition from academia to industry, where Valentina, who is an associate director of marketing research, she is going to talk about the postdoctoral career planning and transition planning, and how to build network and designing your resume and CV for any industry related positions, and also of course like preparing for the interview and offer negotiations. This will be a 4-part session, so without I just wanted to acknowledge our INet-NYC co-founders and current presidents and advisory board to successfully and helpfully running this great organization to help all the researchers in STEM. And we have, of course, our sponsors and partners throughout the New York City area, and not only the New York City area, also we have different partners from outside of the city. So this is what I had to talk about the INet-NYC. I will definitely encourage people to contact us and join in our next events. And also you can apply for the positions in our institute so that we can actually build and grow with our community. Now about the current session. We are really happy to have Brendan with us. He is going to talk about the immigration landscape, all the current changing scenario about the immigration things. So I'll be passing the baton to Brendan, and so that he can share his screen. So I am going to stop sharing here. Brendan, if you can try to share your screen, it will be great. Just before Brendan starts, I just wanted to mention that whoever is going through INet to Brendan, he is really helpful and really experienced in helping in researchers, specifically for the researchers and also other members for the immigration journey. And if you are interested to consult with him through INet, you will get 10% discount on the lawyer fee. So take advantage of that. Brendan, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Darpin, thank you very much for inviting me and inviting me back. I've had the good opportunity to engage with INet in the past, and I'm delighted to be back again this evening. Perhaps some people may have been here last year. What a year it's been, and what an 18 months it's been. So anyway, with all that being said, and I thank Darpin for the introduction, I'm just going to say a little bit. We are based in Bethesda, Maryland, outside the National Institutes of Health. I have had the good opportunity to work extensively with postdoctoral researchers and early mid-career researchers on the international level for quite a number of years. I've worked extensively with the National Postdoctoral Association. And I think just to sort of add to what Darpin was saying, I certainly urge any international researchers to not just sort of show up to the visa and the immigration seminars, but to go to all the different webinars and seminars that are at their disposal, because I think organizations like INet and your PDAs and PDOs, it really gives you a well-rounded opportunity. So, introduction and at the outset, yes, I am an attorney. No, this is not legal advice. So I want to just say that this is an informational and educational seminar, okay? So in terms of specific legal questions, specific legal advice, this is not necessarily the place for it. And you should consult an attorney with regards to that. Now, with that being said, I hope that people come in here tonight, but leave more educated and more informed about the issues that you guys are facing. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. So what am I going to talk about? What am I going to cover tonight? So a couple of things just to sort of keep in mind is I'm going to talk over these slides for the next sort of 45 minutes or so. And at the end of that, we'll get into a Q&A. So where are we? What is the current situation? It's been a very fluid and moving situation over the past 18 to 24 months from a US immigration standpoint. What about you guys in terms of your life? You're a foreign national in the United States. Well, sometimes life and visas gets in the way of career development, things like that. So therefore, it's important to know your options, because that will allow you to navigate the visa process. Many people here today may be in the process of being sponsored for a non-immigrant, a temporary visa. But what can you do to potentially help yourself navigate this? And then at the back end of this, are we sort of going back to some level of normality or normalcy? Hopefully both from a public health standpoint and also from a political standpoint vis-a-vis US immigration. Anyone who has potentially sort of listened to me before or had the opportunity to talk to me is, my main two takeaways as I do these webinars and seminars haven't really changed over the years for the foreign national scientist community. So I think to say these two things is important. Be ready to be flexible. And I mean that in terms of the visas that are in front of you and potential job opportunities, etc. And also sort of understand and recognize that there are short, medium, and long-term goals involved. And so, at points these may conflict, but just keep these things in mind as you make decisions. These decisions as you sort of navigate your career path. There will be crossover between career, personal decisions, and professional decisions, etc. So those are some of the things to keep in mind as you sort of look at and navigate the different visas that are in front of you. And I think it is sort of important to note that this is a journey. There is a road that is in front of you, just as in the little guy there with his suitcase. If I look at the international postdoctoral community in the United States, without getting into sort of specific numbers, we look at the percentages, and more than 50% of postdocs in the United States are foreign nationals. So it's an extremely large population, and you guys have decisions to make. Some of you may have been here for undergraduate or graduate education, but now you're further down your career path, further down your life path. So the tendency is for international postdocs and for sort of earlier and mid-career researchers, you guys are facing different issues. If you were here for undergraduate or graduate education, it was all under that umbrella of the F visa. And many of you still are utilizing the F1 or the OPT or the STEM extension. But for many others, you're now involved or you're under a J1 research scholar visa or a H1B visa. And I think it's important to sort of note and remember that as a foreign national researcher in the United States, that you can utilize up to about 14 years of temporary visa status. Now, I understand that not everybody will do that. And this is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all answer. But just keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to run before you can walk, and that there are visa options and visa alternatives there in front of you as you do indeed navigate this journey. So who can help? Who are the people to talk to? If you are in an academic situation, you have to remember you're ultimately still under the umbrella of your international office. So therefore, they can answer questions about OPT, about STEM extensions, the position of J1, the visa pertaining to you as a J1 research scholar, or for example, the H1B, you may be a research associate. However, it is important to remember that in our audience tonight, we have people from many different institutions. And so titles and positions matter. And titles, positions, and duties can differ a little bit at different institutions. So I think it's important to remember to talk to the people who matter. You may have friends and colleagues at different institutions. Their title may be similar. Institution A may sponsor that title for a H1B, institution B may not. So you got to talk to the people within your institution and know and understand what is actually in front of you in that regard. So it's very important, I think, to stay in touch with your international office in that regard. What about your career office? Because a lot of the decisions that you will make with regards to your visa, there's going to be crossover with your career. So I think talking to your career office and understanding what the different career opportunities are like here in the United States is also important. And just like today, the postdoc office or networking organizations such as INet, who I think are an excellent resource for you guys up in New York, should be proactive, just like is happening this evening. You have seminars and programs which enable you to keep abreast of changes in the immigration world. And just, I think, as Darpin mentioned, it also enables you and facilitates you with additional resources and developmental areas where you can enhance other parts of your professional development. So I think I always find it very important to sort of communicate with your organizations and go to these different events as they are on offer to you. Going back to the visas, Again, reach out to and interact with your international office because they are a resource for you who can give you the information at your university or at your institution. If you are in an industry capacity, I nearly got that out. In an industry capacity, you should talk to HR because again, I think it's important, while it is important to look at and discuss the issues that are involved, and just like I'm going to provide information here tonight, it's always important to know what is actually in play at your institution or with your employer. So stay informed. That's the basis of all of this. I think that at any time in life where we can get good information, it allows us to make better decisions. So forewarned is forearmed. So keep that in mind as you make these sort of decisions that will affect your career and your life, because I always like to say it's always better to make informed decisions. So I'm going to start by trying to sort of talk about some of the issues surrounding the current situation. Over the past 20 to maybe 24 months pre-COVID, as we entered the pandemic area, in the last stages of the prior administration, clearly there were issues affecting immigration. That's not news to anyone. As we entered into the COVID pandemic, that has been exacerbated. So I'm going to try and give you some information about what is maybe important in the immediacy. As we find ourselves in a health pandemic, how does that affect your visa? It's even more important to keep in contact with your visa sponsor during all this, because there has been changes to our work environment. Obviously, we're starting to come back to a more normal situation, but there have and do continue to be changes. So I think keeping in contact with your visa sponsor, being ready to adhere to any procedural changes from an administrative and employment sense is important, because that allows you to avoid any unauthorized activity. It also allows you to make sure that your visa paperwork continues to be in proper order. If your status is expiring, this is becoming sort of less of an issue now, because international travel has opened up. But if you are unable to leave the United States for a period of time, for whatever reason, and your status is expiring, you do have the opportunity to potentially file paperwork to either extend or change your status to enable you to remain here in valid status for a short period of time, if, for example, your visa is expiring. So what's been happening with USCIS during all of this? Well, the field offices are open. That is where you have interviews. That is where final interviews take place and things like that. In terms of the service centers where you file your cases, H-1Bs, green cards, employment authorization, etc., it's important to note that they have been open and accepting cases throughout the pandemic. They did not close. Premium processing for certain cases was postponed for a while, but it's back. A couple of things to note, however. Whatever case you are looking at preparing, be ready for administrative delays. So to the extent that you can, I would advise you to prepare early. The case intake and issuance of receipts for about probably the last 10 months have been heavily affected at USCIS. Clearly, they are having staffing issues. However, we've been fielding a lot of questions about the presidential proclamations and the travel issues. And it's important to note that the presidential proclamations that are in play essentially affect people outside the United States who are waiting to be issued their green cards and certain temporary visas. These are not affecting internal applications. So if, for example, you have filed a green card application, you have filed a request to change status from OPT to H-1B or J-1 to H-1B, these are not affecting your applications that are being processed by USCIS here in the United States. This is essentially a travel issue and an issuance of visa problem. However, during all of this, visas have continued to be issued to those who have been working to treat or mitigate the effects of COVID-19. And there is that inconsistent problem out there about national interest exceptions. Unfortunately, I think in this climate, I can't get into the nuts and bolts of the national interest exceptions. I will say that if this is something that you are pursuing, that you potentially need to travel outside the United States and return, and a national interest exception is something that you need to do, I would advise you to review the law and the regulations with a professional, and also bring into play your employer. So what's been going on? Way back when, in April and June of 2000, it seems like a lifetime ago, there was a limit on the processing of permanent residence and H-1B visas. This was then lifted, and it's been going back and forth. Again, this all pertained to the processing of visas at US embassies and consulates. As I said there in point number 4, it did not affect immigrant visa applications or non-immigrant applications here inside the US. Okay, so that's an important thing to note. A couple of things that have changed with the change in administration. If we rewind our minds back to the spring of 2020, again, it seems like so long ago, the Trump administration essentially looked at the entry of aliens who they saw as detrimental to the United States, and were looking at this from a negative impact on the labor market, as opposed to the broader public health aspects. So while the same issues are sort of in play in terms of issuance of visas and an inability of people to potentially enter the United States or return after foreign travel, the Biden administration has now been looking at this more from a public health standpoint. I'm not here to sort of talk about the policies or comment upon the policies, so sort of don't shoot the messenger. I think it's fair to say that in the summer of this year, we thought that things were maybe going to open up a little bit more than they did. But here we are. International travel has still been pretty dramatically restricted in terms of coming to the United States. Now, if you do need to travel to the US, even with a valid visa, you still need a negative COVID test, and travel from the Schengen area and other affected areas is still not permitted absent a national interest exception. It's possible to potentially travel elsewhere and then quarantine for 14 days, but that's quite general, and be careful. Ultimately, you have to review the situation very carefully in the context of your own personal situation. I would urge people not to take sort of unsolicited advice or non-legal advice from people, and to get the information from sources that matter. How has this all played out with USCIS? Well, at certain points in the process, field offices did shut down, premium processing did shut down, so there was significant delays in adjudication of cases. Those are back open. Premium processing has resumed, field offices has reopened. During this entire time frame, over the past sort of 20 odd months, I fielded a lot of questions about, well, is USCIS closed? And I still file cases. And it's important to sort of note and understand that USCIS did not close during the pandemic. Service centers did remain open and have continued processing cases throughout the COVID-19 era. There's actually been one or two, I suppose, minor benefits. Under certain employment-based green card applications, certain people have had their final interview requirement waived, and the service centers have actually undertaken final adjudication and issuance of green cards. However, interviews did restart last July, and therefore cases that perhaps needed an interview were called. They were called for interviews. However, it's important to understand that during all of this, there have been significant processing delays. Starting on or around last October, processing delays regarding issuance of receipts became extensive. There were certain cases that were filed in or around October or November of 2020 where people just weren't even getting the receipts for 3, 4, 5 months. With regards to your employment authorization documents and AP, advanced parole, renewals are highly delayed, especially in the context of adjustment of status applications. So again, prepare early. In this fiscal year, which is going to end in about 2 weeks, there are huge numbers of green cards that are essentially being wasted. USCIS are not getting to them. They're not adjudicating. There are lawsuits in play over this, but how it's going to play out, we just don't know. I have read reports, it's difficult to quantify, that USCIS are currently sitting on over 7 million pending applications. So there's a huge strain on the system, and that is leading to sort of, again, administrative delays and processing delays. Just today, I was made aware from the Washington District Office that certain interviews at local offices in September are being cancelled. Why? Well, USCIS are internally reassigning officers to assist with the processing of Afghan parolees in the post US withdrawal from Kabul. So we're going to see continued issues surrounding different aspects and facets of administrative processing within USCIS. So that's how things sort of stand right now. That's the state of play, for want of a better term. But that's not all we're going to talk about tonight. We also want to talk about the normal, the how do you process, how do you deal with the green cards, because life goes on and we still have to make these decisions. We still have to look at where life takes us personally, career-wise, professionally, etc. So some of the issues and questions that foreign national scientists and researchers face are as follows. Academia versus industry. Where do you see yourself going in that short, medium to long term? And therefore, which visa or which status are you going to use or utilize? Going to use a J1, H1B, or OPT? You're here on a J1 as a research scholar. Can you transfer that? What's the best way to utilize it? Can I do an O1? Why would I want to do an O1? And I think ultimately for anyone who's a foreign national residing in the United States, working in the United States, ultimately the question comes down to this. Do I want to be here temporarily or permanently? So walking through some of the most relevant visas that affect international postdocs, I would say the following. And first of all, for F1 OPT and STEM extension, I could probably do an entire presentation on this. But the editorial summary is as follows. Again, you're going to be under the umbrella of the international office, depending upon where you went to university. So talk to them. They are definitely your friend in the context of OPT and the STEM extension. A couple of things I'd say about both of these statuses is that the OPT, the post-completion OPTs, which is good for 12 months. And then we have the STEM extension. It's good for up to 24 additional months. And just a couple of things to note about that. Firstly, you must have a qualifying STEM degree. The employer must be an E-verified employer, and there must be a bona fide employer-employee relationship. So it's a little bit more constricted than the sort of post-completion OPT. The idea of volunteering or self-employment work is generally not permitted. So if you've any questions about what you are engaged in while on the STEM extension, I would urge you to reach out to your international office. Again, to make sure that you're not engaged in some type of activity that could or would be unauthorized. If you are going to utilize your OPT or your STEM extension to leave academia and go into industry, I would urge you to be careful about your next steps, looking at the longer term picture. The reason being is that at the end of that STEM extension, you may need some other visa to continue to be engaged in gainful employment if you haven't sort of made the transition to a green card. And therefore, if you're in an industry setting, you may run into the H1B cap. More on that in a moment. The next one is the J. The J1 Research Scholar visa is a very commonly utilized visa for foreign national researchers. And there's a lot to like. Without joking too much, generally speaking, if you don't have to deal with USCIS, that's not a bad thing. The J1 is also quite easy to administer and is transferable, certainly within an academic setting. If you're married, your J2 spouse can apply for employment authorization, and there are some tax treaties in play which can benefit you, although I am not here to talk about tax questions, so I will defer on that point. However, connected to and as part of the J1 visa is 212E. What is 212E? 212E is a 2-year home residence requirement. Generally speaking, a research scientist will be subject to 212E if they received money from the US government or their home government, or they are on their home country's skills list. So I'm going to say a couple of things about it. If you are subject to the 2-year home residence requirement, you either need to get a waiver of that or you need to fulfill it. It doesn't go away by itself. Okay, so you got to deal with it. if you are subject to 212E, it's something that you have to deal with. If you are hoping or attempting to transition to a H-1B or a green card, you're going to need a waiver to do that, or go home for 2 years. And home means home. So for example, from my own perspective, I'm from outside Belfast in Northern Ireland. If, for example, I was to go home and fulfill that requirement, I can't go to Dublin. I can't go home and fulfill it in Dublin, even though it's 2 hours down the road. France, Germany, you've got to go home to your home country. You cannot change status if 212E applies. One other thing is that in certain instances, the consulate can make a mistake. What I mean by that is your visa stamp may well indicate that you are subject to 212E, or it may say that you're not subject to 212E, and that may be incorrect. So if there's any discrepancy on that front, you would get what's called an advisory opinion from the Waiver Review Division of the State Department, just to get clarity and confirmation as to where you stand. Because it is important to know where you do stand with regards to the 2-year home residence requirement, if there's any issue at play. The next one is the H-1B. And basically, the big ones here is it cap exempt or cap subject? What that means is academia is exempt from the cap. In an industry setting, there's 85,000 H-1Bs available during the fiscal year. So academia can file a H-1B for you at any time. Industry cannot. One of the other differences between the H-1B and the J and the F is that the H-1B is dual intent. USCIS do not see any conflict in you holding H-1B, working and traveling on a H-1B, notwithstanding presidential proclamations. And this can be maintained up until the day you get your green card. And that's not the same as the J or the F. You've got to be careful as you pursue a green card while on J or F, because there can be a conflict there pertaining to immigrant intent, etc. And we may deal with some of that in the questions later. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to know the policy where you are, because titles and positions matter. As we look at some of the differences, academia versus industry, I think it's fair to say that under the last administration, we definitely saw higher levels of scrutiny on standards of adjudication. The wages and types of position came under a lot more scrutiny. There was a tightening of standards for industry-based H-1Bs. However, under the Biden administration, we have seen a little bit of a pullback in that regard. And for example, they have now once again said that they will give deference to prior approvals. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that if, for example, employer A filed a H-1B for you, and they went to extend your H-1B for the same or similar position, then generally speaking, USCIS will grant deference to that prior approval. Under the previous administration, essentially each H-1B application was reviewed as a new application. So they would not give deference to previous approvals. What other options? Another option that's on the table for you is the O1. I'm not going to speak too much about this, but suffice to say, the 2 to 3 main points to make about the O1. Well, first of all, it's a very restrictive standard. You're going to have very solid professional credentials and attributes to be able to be approved. One of the important things to note about the O1 is that if you are in fact subject to the 2-year home residence requirement, you do not need to get a waiver to obtain your O1 visa, and that's different from the H-1B. If you have an outstanding 212E requirement, then you can still get an O1. How that would play out is that the employer would file on your behalf. The underlying case would be approved by immigration. You would leave the United States, get the visa stamp, and then return in O1 status. Remember what I said earlier, if that is the case, you would still ultimately need to get a waiver of the 2-year home residence requirement or fulfill it, because even though you have sort of kicked that can down the curb, it is still in play. It's also, it's also a good option for industry if and when there are no H-1Bs available. And I believe there was a question that had been posed just prior to the event. There's no discernible time limit on O1s, and they can generally be filed for an initial 3 years and then extended in 1-year increments. But again, remember, it's a very restrictive standard. and you've got to have very solid credentials and attributes to be able to be approved. So as we sort of looked at some of the temporary options that are in play for you, and as you sort of look at these, you make decisions, are there added pressures and responsibilities? And do you feel constrained with regards to your visa situation in the context of potentially your professional and career development? Well, I think one of the important things to do is to look at the alternatives and sort of understand not only what is in front of you, but again, as I said earlier, how you can potentially help yourself. So a couple of the questions to ask from an employer standpoint is know their policies. Whether you are in an academic setting or an industry setting, is company or institutional sponsorship a possibility? Now, if you get approved for a H-1B, it's probably not necessarily the best idea to go knocking on doors on day 2 and to try and find out if you can get sponsored for a green card. But just as I say that, don't leave it too long. Don't sort of wake up in year 5 and find out that company or institutional sponsorship is not a possibility, because under that regard, you're doing yourself a disservice. You need to ultimately protect yourself in some of these decisions that you will make. But I also do want to say one thing, even though, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this may be, frustrating, it may be difficult to deal with. As highly qualified individuals who are working in a profession and fields that is recognized for importance to the United States, you guys have options that many highly qualified individuals in the United States do not. And the fact that the self-sponsored green card options that are in play, the extraordinary ability and the national interest waiver, are options that research scientists have, assuming ultimately that you have substance and the significance of the work behind you, that other well-qualified professionals may not. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. And also, I think it's fair to say that as the years have gone on, there are now multiple career options outside of academia that you can utilize and apply your scientific knowledge to, that they're still covered by the self-sponsored green card process. What is the difference between employer and self-sponsored? Well, an employer-sponsored green card is essentially the traditional method and fairly easily to navigate. Under a self-petitioned application, you are the one driving the process, and therefore it can give you and does give you additional options and can open additional doors. But I would urge everyone to be prepared to understand the process. Okay. With that being said, if you have the background, the attributes, the credentials, the contributions to be able to process a self-petitioned application, then ultimately you will have more options and more doors will be open to you regarding ongoing employment. Employer-sponsored green cards, this is just an informational slide. You'll either be sponsored under PERM, which is the traditional method, under special handling, which is the university setting, or under an EB-1B, outstanding professor or researcher. And under each of these, the employer is the entity that is driving the process. Okay, so you'll get the information from them and they will essentially handle the process. However, under self-petitioned applications, is this something that you can consider? So here are the questions that I think you need to ask yourself. Number one, well, what is it, right? Well, it's a self-sponsored application. Just as in the previous slide, I indicated that the employer was the entity driving the process. Under a self-petitioned application, you, as the individual, are the person that is driving the process. So what are you asking? Well, as I like to tell people, it's a very sort of fancy way of asking a very simple question. Do I qualify for a green card? Do I qualify for a green card as an alien of extraordinary ability? Do I qualify for a green card as an advanced degree alien performing work in the US national interest? That's what you're asking. Well, logically, the next question becomes, well, am I qualified? And I think in here, this is where things get a little bit more subjective. You do need strong professional credentials. I think it's important to note that the importance of your work in and of itself is not enough. Everyone in the audience tonight is doing important work. Perhaps at a juncture in your career, not all of your work is significant enough. And that's why you prepare yourself, you be ready. I think it's very important to get a full and frank evaluation of your credentials. And for example, as when we work with people in this regard, we look at CVs, we look at resumes, and we give you that type of feedback. Are you ready? What is best for you at this point? Another aspect of this is that you do have to show the intent to continue working in your field in the United States. However, as I indicated earlier, you're not tied to a specific employer. This does open up doors and this does give you options. Another important part of this is, let's say, for example, you come to the end of your sort of research project, research initiative in the United States, and you return home for a period of time. You can still file this application. You could apply from overseas and essentially in the future return to the United States with a green card. So if you do have to leave or want to leave, this is still an option for you to pursue in the future. Extraordinary ability. This is the most restrictive standard. If you have a major internationally recognized award, if anybody's got a Nobel Prize sitting at home on their mantelpiece, you're good to go. I suspect not. So luckily, there are criteria. You have to meet a minimum of 3 out of 10. Now, it's important to note that some of the categories are quite objective in nature and some of them are a lot more subjective. And it's important to understand that. It's also important to know that not all of the criteria pertain to the sciences, because individuals, people, different professions in different fields can qualify as being extraordinary. It could be in the arts, it could be business, it could be sport. So whilst many of the criteria do in fact pertain to the sciences, not all of them do. Once you meet 3 of the categories, you also have to show that you're one of the few at the top of your field, that you have sustained national or international acclaim. You have to show a consistent career of excellence. So it's not an easy standard to meet. And I think that if this is a visa category that you wish to pursue, it's important to take a look at things and to go into it with your eyes open and sort of fully understand where things sit in terms of your overall credentials, your overall professional attributes, and the extent to which your scientific contributions make you a good, solid, or a strong candidate for this type of visa. I'm just going to go back one slide quickly to maybe explain a little bit further what I talk about the objective versus subjective criteria. I'm going to bring 3 or 4 of the different categories into play quickly. Number 1 is publication in professional or trade journals. Essentially, by looking at this category, once you have published in scientific research journals, then USCIS will generally indicate that you meet that category. It's a fairly objective standard. Similarly, if you have peer reviewed, and you have to have peer reviewed at the behest of and for the journal, not for your lab chief, not for your PI, but once you have peer reviewed on a number of occasions for scientific journals, they will generally find that you meet judge of the work of others. So that's fairly objective. But then we look at a couple of some more subjective criteria. And the big one, in my opinion, is original scientific contributions of major significance. Well, any of your scientific findings, your research contributions, etc., they're original. And depending upon the manner of the dissemination or the actual contribution that you made, you may well have a solid, good argument that they are significant. But then you have to look at that little word major. So what constitutes a finding or a contribution of major significance? So you can see how that may be a little bit more subjective, a little bit more discretionary. So again, 3 categories plus. You got to show that you're one of the few at the top of your field, sustain national or international acclaim. And so for many people, this may be a little bit of a reach. But we also have the option of the national interest waiver. Full title is Advanced Degree Alien Performing Work in the US in the National Interest. So what do we have to look at? Well, it's almost certainly a better and a less restrictive alternative for postdocs and researchers. In this visa category, we tend to look at it as more of a sort of cumulative and broad analysis of your overall body of work. But I will reiterate, and I will indicate again, the mere act of publication, presentation, and dissemination in and of itself is not enough. That is what you as a researcher are supposed to do, okay? So you got to look beyond that. Now, as in the EB1A, you're the one driving the process, and we look towards continuation in your field as opposed to being tied to a job offer with a specific employer. Now, what's our test here? Three-part test. Number one, you have to show that the proposed endeavor carries substantial merit and national importance. Second, which is really the meat of the whole application, is that the foreign national is well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor. And this is where you have to go way beyond sort of scratching the surface of just saying, I do this, I do that. This is where we got to dig deeper into the substance of your scientific research contributions. And then ultimately that it would be beneficial to the United States to waive the requirements of job offer and labor certification. In effect, that the credentials and attributes that you bring to the table will benefit the United States enough that they want you here. So that's the test. Now, under the old test, which was put to the side about 4 or 5 years ago, immigration officers for research scientists looked at citations a lot. Now we get the opportunity to bring in things like cover articles, editorial highlights, standards of publication, journal rankings, the extent to which others have utilized or implemented your findings, your involvement in grants, funding, what has your work entailed, encompassed, how well positioned are you is the question to meet the national interest waiver standard. Now, regardless of whether you are going to pursue an extraordinary ability case or a national interest case, how strong is your case? What do you need to bring to the table? And all of the evidence, everything that you do from a professional standpoint, all comes into play. You know, I would say that certain aspects of your career accomplishments, it's going to move the needle to a greater extent than others. So what about your publication record? So as I said a moment ago, publication and dissemination is what you're supposed to do. So we want to look at quality, perhaps the quality over the quantity. Do you need to have published in Nature, Cell, and Science? Well, it helps, of course it helps, but it's not required because we want to remember what your specialty is. And therefore it's up to us to educate the immigration officer about the journals in which you have published in the context of what your specialty is. Are these journals well regarded in your field? Are they highly ranked within your field? And so therefore we build it in that regard. Similarly, the idea that we can show recognition from others in the field with regards to your research. Anyone that's sort of communicated with me or knows me is one of my favorite sort of lines. And as we have early discussion with people is, you know, all of the research is important, not all of the research is significant. How do we show your research is significant? What is your citation history? Has there been cover articles or editorial highlights about your work? Have others implemented or utilized your findings in their own? If there's a patent in your background, has that been commercialized? Has that been utilized, implemented? These are the extra steps we need to take to educate the immigration officer to the extent to which you are well positioned to continue to advance your field. Or in the context of an EB1A, these contributions may be of major significance. And I go on to networking because this slide plays into the next one. Use your professional relationships because the idea of expert opinion letters matter. Now, expert opinion letters or recommendation letters should not necessarily form the basis of your application, but they form an important part because we want good, solid letters to corroborate, confirm, and attest to your overall contributions of all that evidence that we just talked about, publications, the citation history, the grants, the fundings, the peer review, things like that. These letters can now form corroboration of all of that. They have to be specific, they have to be descriptive, they can't just be general, flowery language. Dr. Delaney from Belfast is an alien of extraordinary ability, period. Not enough, we need substance. Independent letters are a plus. Generally, we try to marry the idea of sort of letters from people who you have worked and collaborated with other independent letters. I'm going to go back a slide. What do I mean when I say use your professional relationships? Well, if you have a good, solid relationship with your PI, with your lab chief, with your department head, you may be able to be in a position to go and talk to him or her and say, excuse me, I'm filing this application. What about one of your colleagues who works in the same field as us, but who has not worked directly with me? Would you, as my lab chief, PI, department head, be willing to talk to them and have them write a letter, see if they would write a letter on my behalf? If you have that solid, strong, professional relationship with your lab chief, PI, department head, whomever, they may be more willing to make that sort of question on your behalf to their colleagues, and that can then help their application. So all of this sort of plays in together. Transitional, non-traditional careers, this can also be utilized. I think historically the self-petitioned applications was a pathway to ongoing academic research, but the application of scientific knowledge in different fields is now more in play, and it's recognized by immigration that the application of your scientific knowledge, whether that's from an entrepreneurial, industry, or academic standpoint, can still be considered to be in the same or allied field of endeavor. So you can utilize the self-sponsored application to sort of enhance your transitional or non-traditional career prospects, and you can continue to sort of take these opportunities under an understanding that immigration will continue to see this in the same or allied field of endeavor. Now, caveat, if you stretch it, if you move too far away from your research field, then that may be problematic. But generally speaking, the application and implementation of your scientific knowledge in the same or similar field and position can utilize both an industry or academic or entrepreneurial capacity. So now that we've sort of looked at the green card and we're sort of getting into the home stretch, and then I'm going to hand it back to Darvin for Q&A, we'll start to finish up. What is retrogression? Well, you can file an I-140, an extraordinary ability, or a national interest waiver at any time. But that does not necessarily mean that the green card will be issued immediately. The US has a finite number of green cards that they give out every year. For certain countries, there is immediate availability. However, for both China and India, under the EB2, there are significant backlogs, especially so for India. So therefore, you have to potentially strategize and say, okay, how am I going to approach this for the sort of medium to long term? For Chinese and Indian nationals, you can potentially hold your place in line by filing an EB2. So even though it may not give you an immediate benefit, by filing it, it can hold your place for any subsequent employment-based application. There's the dates. For everyone other than India and China, both EB1 and EB2 are current. What that means is that you can attach your adjustment of status at the time of filing or any time thereafter. China EB2 is July 1st, 2018, so you're looking at about a 3-year wait. India, the EB2 numbers are dramatic. You're looking at a 10-year wait, and how long that really is in reality, we just don't know. So, yes, there are hurdles. So be mature enough to look at this pragmatically, okay? Not everybody may work it out. It's not an easy system. It can be a frustrating system. I understand that. But I think if you prepare yourselves, ask the correct questions, get the information that you need, and make the correct informed decisions and learn what is in front of you, you can get to where you need to be. And I'm going to say this again. The United States recognizes the importance of science, and it recognizes the importance of international researchers. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it does. The delays, the visas that are being wasted, all of that stuff. But ultimately, as researchers engaged in important work, you will get to where you want and need to be. Now, I'm going to finish last 2 slides, some housekeeping. If you're able to get a visa appointment, notwithstanding presidential proclamations, executive orders, if you are engaged in any type of sort of security or delicate field, please make sure and set up any visa appointment well in advance, because there is still the old problem with administrative process. So keep that in mind, even as we deal with all of this stuff in terms of processing delays and NIEs and COVID. Also, just some of the old stuff, because people forget that, oh, well, I mean, it's just COVID, so I just have to deal with this. No, there's all this other stuff you have to keep in mind too. If you get hit with a DUI or a DWI, the State Department can revoke your visa. You do not even need a conviction. We have seen that we have been in an era of extreme vetting at border, at airports, etc. They're asking for passwords, social media, phones, computers. However, there's a little bit of positive news, third or fourth one down, as I mentioned earlier. USCIS have indicated they will return to giving deference to prior approvals, so that's some positive there. We are in the middle of a court case to avoid some sort of spillover wastage with green cards, which don't necessarily spill over into the next fiscal year. I don't know how positive I am about what the outcome will be, but let's wait and see. And then we have the politics of it. There are bills that get introduced left, right, and center. There was the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, which was removed per country limits. We had, to my understanding, a bill that would remove per country, or would alleviate per country limits if you were willing to pay an additional fee. There has been the issue of work authorization for H4s being revoked. How does this all play out? It's hard to know, because, as I say at the bottom, I think stay appraised. But let's get to that in a moment. We have been, over the past number of years, not just the past 18 to 20 months in COVID, but the prior administration, the Trump administration, I don't think we're the biggest fans of US immigration, to say that lightly. So I'm hopeful that we see positive administrative change coming, but don't expect it to happen overnight. I will say, from a sort of personal / professional standpoint, I'm a little disappointed that things have not sort of improved as much as I thought they would in the first sort of 8-9 months of this administration. But I'm still hopeful. And ultimately, the question becomes, will Congress pass a bill? What I am seeing and what I am sort of aware of is that the budget reconciliation may be the answer, but there's a lot of politicking that's going to go into that. My understanding is that STEM is in play, and that's the big question for sort of the research community. Will the idea of research in STEM provide some type of tangible benefit? We just don't know yet. So I think to stay appraised and wait for the sort of real, actual information to see how that plays out is important. I get it that information can be garnered from many different sources, friends, colleagues, forums, it's all there, right? But just make sure and ultimately wait for the real and actual information. So on that point, I'm going to say thank you for attending today. And thanks again to INet for having me. I genuinely hope that everybody has enjoyed the presentation and is going to walk away more informed than they walked in. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass it back to you, Darpin.
Thank you, Bretton. It was really great. It was really informative. As you mentioned, that whole process is not easy. It's better to be informed, and it's really informative. Hopefully, people get a lot information what they needed. Probably from now on, we will try to stop the recording.